Welcome, dear friends, to this Dharma session. Very good morning to you all, and thank you for joining this session live. I'd like to just point you to the chat box where I first of all put the website for the new Italian monastery project. Really big encouragement for you to have a look at this website, emptyclouditalia.org, and see if there's any ways in which you might like to be involved in this wonderful project. I believe Ayasoma's on her way to Italy very soon to be meeting with friends there and returning with her mother to her mother's homeland and to be supporting this project from home base. I'd like to offer a sutta today as a springboard for this session. I posted again in the chat the sutta called Terra Namaka Sutta, which I've chosen, a mendicant named Senior, which is from Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 21, sutta number 10. So you can see the reference there. And yeah, big greetings to those of you who are joining. I'd like to begin by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, I'd like to begin by reading this sutta, which is a sutta really about solitude, about viveka, and how we practice with this quality, seclusion. So if you'd like to relax and just listen, I'm going to be reading from the sutta. Awam. Sutta called A Mendicant Named Senior. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrels feeding ground. At that time, there was a certain mendicant named Senior. He lived alone, and he praised living alone. He entered the village for alms alone. He returned alone. He sat in private alone, and he concentrated on walking mindfully alone. Then several mendicants went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Sir, there's a certain mendicant named Senior who lives alone and praises living alone." So the Buddha addressed one of the monks, "Please, in my name, tell the mendicant Senior that the teacher summons him." "Yes, Reverend," that monk replied. He went to the Buddha, bowed, and sat down to one side. So the Buddha has called Senior to discuss his practice with him. He said, the Buddha says, "Is it really true, Senior, that you live alone and praise living alone?" "Yes, sir." "But in what way do you live alone and praise living alone?" And Senior answers, "Well, sir, I enter the village for alms alone. I return alone. I sit in private alone. And I walk mindfully alone. That is how I live alone and practice living alone." And the Buddha replies, "This is a kind of living alone. I don't deny it. But as to how living alone is fulfilled in detail, listen and apply your mind. I will speak." And how is living alone fulfilled in detail? It's when What is in the past is given up. What is in the future is relinquished. And desire and greed for present incarnations is eliminated. That's how living alone is fulfilled in detail. That is what the Buddha said. And then the Holy One, the teacher, went on to say, the champion, all-knower, so very intelligent, is unsullied in the midst of things. He's given up all, freed in the ending of craving. I declare that person to be one who lives alone. A1. So this is a really beautiful, clear, short, concise teaching for us, really teasing out the meaning of viveka, of solitude. And in the later teachings, commentaries that followed long after the Buddha's parinibbana, we've been given the concept of three kinds of viveka, three kinds of solitude. Kaya viveka, physical solitude, which is really what the monk Senior was practicing impeccably, keeping himself separate, keeping himself secluded from others. And then there's chitta viveka, which is really what the Buddha's pointing to here. You know, it's a higher, you could say, more profound, more attained way of being secluded, which is to be secluded from our own crazy minds, friends. To be secluded from the tendency to dwell in the past, to be secluded from the tendency to project forwards into the future, and in the present, to be willing to let go of the tendency to proliferate, to create, to embellish what's actually real, what's actually the truth of this moment. So this is Upadhi Viveka, this is Chitta Viveka, this ability to be present. And this seclusion is a true seclusion that doesn't require even the physical seclusion from others, from noise, from the hustle and bustle of life, from the conditions around us. There's no need with Chitta Viveka to try to control the world around us, to make it quiet, to make it possible for us to practice, to have silence and peace for conditions. This is not necessary if we practice Chitta Viveka, the seclusion of a mind that's awake to what's true, the Dhamma of this moment. There's a beautiful sutta in Majjhima Nikaya where the Buddha talks about one single excellent attachment. Many of you will be familiar with this sutta, Bhaddikarata Sutta. There are actually 4 suttas on this topic. And in each sutta, there's a beautiful verse that the Buddha gives, which is repeated in each of the 4 suttas. And again, it's a teaching encouraging us to hold on to just one thing and let everything else go. Hold on to the present moment, this experience, here and now. Again, in this sutta, Bhaddikarata Suttas, the Buddha says, don't run into the future and don't hold on to the past. The past is over and the future is yet to come, is not in our hands, essentially, is not knowable. But all that we can do is to be here now and to really make the most of this present moment, to behave skillfully according to the conditions of this present moment, and to allow the mind to be present, to be experiencing fully this present moment without distraction, without proliferation. So this quality of Chitta Viveka is perhaps we could say a more true form of seclusion. And it's more doable because we can cultivate develop the quality of chitta viveka wherever we are, whether we're physically secluded or not. So kaya viveka, physical seclusion, very important. I'll say a bit more about that in a while. Chitta viveka, the seclusion of the skillful mind that's practicing well, dwelling in the present, the here and now. And there's a third form of viveka, of seclusion, that's talked about in the commentaries, which is upadhi viveka, which is the seclusion of a mind that is no longer affected, bombarded, buffeted by the taints, by the defilements, by desire, by aversion, by confusion or delusion or ignorance. So this is the true solitude of a realized person, somebody who's free from suffering, who's attained the final goal of our practice. And so this is something to aim for. And in aiming for upadhi viveka, the freedom from any kind of distraction, delusion, suffering, we, in working towards this ultimate form of seclusion, we want to practice chitta viveka. Coming back to kaya viveka, coming back to the seclusion of the form of the body, for sure, the Buddha really did recommend that we try to seek out seclusion when it's appropriate, when it's possible, when the conditions allow, when it's the most compassionate approach. And for sure, when we're meditating, it's very helpful to seek out quiet places, isn't it? I mean, the Buddha in his lifetime, when he was the Bodhisattva, before he became the Buddha, he practiced seclusion to an extreme degree. He practiced many things to an extreme degree, right? As many of you will know, he fasted to an extreme degree. He even cut off his breathing, fasted on the breath to an extreme degree until he was really suffering very much. He became very emaciated, very physically unhealthy because of his extreme ascetic practices. And in relation to seclusion, he would plunge into the forest, find the most remote places to practice, caves also. And, he said when he was a bodhisattva, if he saw somebody coming while he was practicing in seclusion, he would run away. He'd hide in order not to connect with and meet anybody else. Such was the degree of seclusion that the Bodhisattva practiced. And as we can really glean from the Buddha's teachings, when he became the Buddha, when he became fully enlightened, his ascetic practices had dropped away as part of his process of realizing the goal of our practice. He moderated the degree to which eating was significantly, you could say, a renunciant practice, but not an ascetic practice to the degree where we have to go hungry or we have to be emaciated, we have to be malnourished. Moderation in eating, moderation in sleeping, the middle way. And so also with solitude. And for sure, the Buddha recommended when we practice meditation, good to find a place where there's quietude, where there's not a lot going on, away from the madding crowd. Find a quiet room. In the time of the Buddha, he recommended go out and seek a wide open space or a heap of straw somewhere, a cave, a mountain, a ravine, the root of a tree. Go into the forest. So yes, we can really take this teaching to heart and feel fine about seeking out quiet places for practice when it's practical, when it's achievable without causing any harm or suffering to anyone else. The The Buddha also, interestingly, didn't always recommend seclusion to the monastics, to his disciples. There's a sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, Badali Sutta. There's a monk called Badali who was seeking out solitude, just like this monk senior here in this teaching. Badali was wanting to go off to the forest and to practice on his own, and the Buddha actually said to him, "This is not the right time for you. You're not ready for this." And there's another sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, the Fear and Dread Sutta, where again the Buddha is discussing with one of the lay disciples how going off to very remote places is fine, but it's not suitable for everybody. So there's a gradual training here, which the Buddha has described in many teachings. So solitude and the practice of getting away from everybody and practicing alone for significant periods of time is really part of the path of practice when it's suitable, when it's possible, but it's not the first thing that we would want to be doing. So in the case of Badali, for instance, he was encouraged by the Buddha to continue practicing in the Sangha, in community, because that's what he needed in order to start his training, to begin to develop on the path. So I'm sure you're all very aware of the gradual training that the Buddha laid down for us, beginning with Sila, of course, the foundation. So let's not worry too much about going on long silent retreats or going off to very remote places to practice. If we haven't developed the Sila, the virtue, if we're not able to keep the 5 precepts, that's way more important until we've developed our practice to the extent that our speech, our behavior, and even our ways of thinking are consciously inclining towards the good and disinclining towards any kind of harm whatsoever. So this is the first and most important foundational practice for us, is to practice the precepts, keep the precepts in mind, and avoid any kind of harm, And then we're practicing virtue. We can begin to develop a degree of mindfulness. We can begin to practice a degree of renunciation to actually limit the amount of input. And this relates to solitude, because if we're surrounded all the time by the worldly news, the media, the movies, the music, the art, and so forth, not disparaging any of it, but it's more like, do we need to maybe reduce the amount of input, the amount of information, mental conditioning that we're taking in from outside? Do we need to practice solitude in this way? We don't have to take ourselves away from the world, but we can be very careful about how much we connect with the endless amount of information that we can take in. And take care. So a degree of renunciation is the next aspect, really, of the gradual training, to just moderate how much we're receiving and come home and pay attention, to what's actually happening here in this mind and body. Another aspect of the gradual training is to moderate eating, moderate sleeping. So to get the right balance so that our bodies are energized, we're healthy, we're well rested, but not oversleeping. So these kinds of practices, actually, we benefit a lot from being around others in the development of these practices. first we want to get these practices down, and then we can think about the long silent retreat, going into the kuti in the forest and so forth. So this is very interesting. Like everything, seclusion is most definitely praised by the wise. It's recommended by the Buddha, but it's also in a context of training whereby, we can recognize whether or not we're ready to step into a more solitary practice. And this again is speaking about kaya viveka, right? This is speaking about the physical seclusion. Now, monks and nuns, of course, we incline towards kaya viveka. We love our solitude. We love to be alone. It's really the common denominator, I would say, for monastics. That we cherish. We love solitude. I don't know any monastics who've stayed in robes for more than a few years who don't actually have this tendency, this inclination. In and of itself, it's not a liberating quality, but it is very helpful if we have the inclination to spend time alone in seclusion, because then we're going to be developing mindfulness more easily. We have more time to meditate. We have more time to take in the Buddha's teachings in quiet surroundings. So it's very natural for monastics to develop and cultivate viveka, kaya viveka. And then coming back to what I was saying earlier, this practice, to whatever degree we feel ready for this practice of having quiet time, alone time, the purpose of this practice is to enable us to progress on the path, to develop mindfulness, to develop samadhi, peacefulness, the still mind. And this is the development of citta viveka, of a mind that is at peace, that is, in a way, kind of, I was going to say insulated from the world, but it's not really like that, is it? It's not that we're separating out. It's not that we become indifferent to the world around us, but we have more like a kind of ability to very spaciously relate to the world around us, So we're not caught up, we're not bombarded or overwhelmed by the conditions around us, but rather we can observe them from a mindful perspective and with equanimity, because with mindfulness, this enlightenment factor of equanimity begins to manifest for us. So to not be, in a way, identifying with experience, but to be able to observe calmly, spaciously. And this citta viveka, this solitude of the heart, of the mind, is inevitable in our practice. We're going to develop this. And it is a way in which peace can come into the world, If we're developing citta viveka, the solitary heart, the solitary mind, that is peacefully and calmly practicing at all times, in all conditions, then we're less likely to be burning with the world that is burning all around us, friends. Burning with what? With the fires of greed, the fires of hatred, the fires of delusion, confusion. And it truly is the case that as we really develop citta viveka, develop in our practice, develop in insight, we can look around and we can see this burning, these fires that are burning in the world. And as we develop this quality of solitude, a solitary heart, a heart that is really only immersed in one thing, and that is in the reality of this moment, in the Dhamma, and therefore in liberation from all suffering. If we're really immersed in this, then we are not going to be taking sides. We're not going to be fired up by what we see and hear and experience. We're going to be always, bringing in a cool, calm, abiding quality of peace, peacefulness, compassion. And this is so needed, right? So important for us as practitioners, as people who love virtue, as people who love freedom, who want to be living in a way that's free from suffering, free from all the unwholesome qualities, to be able to offer this really into the mix, into the field. How valuable, how precious, and to keep practicing whatever the worldly winds are, however they're blowing, however they're buffeting us. So the Buddha spoke a great deal about the solitude that we develop through our practice. So his preliminary instructions, to, in a way, allow ourselves some solitude from the sense realm. Consider restraining the senses so we're not taking in so much from outside. Preliminary instruction, to be able to come into this mind and body and start paying attention and unraveling, untying the knots, seeing the defilements here and seeing how they arise and pass away. And wisdom follows in the wake of this process of insight. This is a preliminary instruction for us. And also the preliminary instruction, Kaya Viveka, take yourself into quiet places whenever you can to practice meditation. Sit in quiet places and be alone, or be with others who are also practicing in this way. This is a preliminary instruction. But then this leads us to this form of solitude, which is Chitta Viveka, which is where we're really continuously, as much as possible, rooting out the defilements, not allowing ourselves to be surrounded by the past or the future, or even proliferating around the present moment. So this is the peace and solitude of the mind that is free, freeing up. My teacher, Luang Por Ganha in Thailand, he speaks about having a heart that is an AC heart. Of course, Thailand is pretty much always hot, and sometimes it's very hot, sometimes it's just hot, sometimes it's very, very hot. And so this simile, this way of describing his experience is really relevant for people there and meaningful, to speak about having an AC heart, a cool heart, a heart surrounded by coolness. And we can do this through our practices, not just practicing solitude, of course, but practicing meditation, practicing moderation, practicing sense restraint, and practicing virtue. We can, through these practices, begin to develop the coolness of heart. And it doesn't mean we always feel cool. It doesn't mean our heart is always peaceful. We can get really reactive, right? We can lose our equanimity. But it's okay when we're practicing, because we can see when we're heating up, we're burning, we're getting involved, we're identifying with experience, we're losing that spacious ability to see the bigger picture. We can notice when that's happening, and through the noticing of that, we're emerging from these taints, from these defilements that cloud and obscure our peaceful, natural, peaceful states. So we can be developing ever more degrees of solitude. This is one way of putting it. This is one lens. As the Buddha said to Senior, the monk, in this sutta, it's okay to, if you can, and as a monk one often can, if you can live alone, not speak to anyone, not see anyone, keep a very quiet background presence, be very unobtrusive, very quiet, practicing. One can do this. And if it's not possible to do this, that's okay. We can still practice with whatever the conditions are. But it's okay to practice in solitude if that's possible for us. And yet, the Buddha said to Senior, I need to tell you more about this quality of solitude. To really practice solitude, seclusion, we want to seclude our minds from the past, seclude them from the future, and seclude them from any embellishment of the present moment. So this is a really profound teaching, friends, and something we can all put into practice. We can notice, can't we, when we incline towards the past, and when we're, in a way, operating in the present through the clouding, the ignorance, the confusion of past experience. So when the past is not fully understood and put aside, we can have patterns of behavior that are painful, that are imbued with desire or aversion or confusion, because we're dwelling in the past. When we remember things from the past, we can have reactions to those memories. We can notice when our present moment is tainted by the past, by unfinished business. And that's fine, because then we can see and experience fully any kind of obscuration or knot or blockage from the past that's obscuring our clear seeing of the present. We can experience that through our practice and see how these patterns can begin to dissolve. And we can be truly here and responsive, skillfully responsive to what's happening here and now. And equally, we can see when our minds move into the future, speculating, maybe worrying about the future, producing a future, creating a future. Nothing wrong with that, but it's actually all illusion, all delusion, because we can't really know what's coming. It's impossible to know. And to put ourselves in that future is to miss the moment, to be asleep to the present moment, to be almost like the Buddha said, like a dead person. We're not alive to the moment. We're not here. When we're careening off to the future, creating and proliferating around it. So we don't want to do that. When we notice then that the mind is going into the future, we can just bring it back. And so helpfully bring it back to the body, bring it back to the breath, which is always here and always now. So let's notice, friends, these ways in which we become entangled. We can be far, far from the madding crowd, here and now, when we're practicing well, staying present, not getting caught up in the past or the future, not proliferating around the present experience, when we're right here, mindful, energized, peaceful, present, wisdom can arise. And this is the true solitude that's possible for all of us. And then, we're working towards Upadhi Viveka, the freedom from all the obscurations, freedom from desire, aversion, delusion. We're most surely moving in this direction. And to get to the point where we are dwelling in Upadhi Viveka, the solitude that's free from any kind of suffering whatsoever, we can be anywhere, in any kind of situation, in the midst of the crowd. And still, as Luang-Por Ganha describes it, there's the AC of the heart, there's the coolness, the peacefulness, this contribution, this offering for ourselves and also for the whole. How valuable, how precious. May we all, through our practice of Chitta Viveka, peaceful heart, mindful heart, witnessing experience but not getting caught up in experience. May we all incline ever more towards Upadhi Viveka and be a beacon of peace and calm and wisdom in this world. Ewam. So these are just a few words about Viveka. It's a huge topic. I would recommend to you all to get a copy of the Majjhima Nikaya and just look up in the index seclusion. There are many suttas that give teachings around this quality, very valuable to investigate. So this is a recommendation, like a homework. Look up seclusion and look at all the different suttas where the Buddha is speaking about this quality. So I'd like to open the space. We have about 20 minutes to see if there are any questions. Questions, friends, on this topic of seclusion, the different kinds or degrees of seclusion, or any other topic around meditation practice or the Dharma teachings that is up for you. All welcome. So, hi everyone. Bhumika, Rebecca, Jayantha, Suchi, Kim, Hum, Charles Lee, Upasika, Metika, Geetha, Tan, Neetu, Harry, Ira, Vivian, Manal, Chev, Karuna. Big welcome to you all. Then we have a couple of questions. Thank you, Dharmika, for your question. Just get it up for us. Here we are. So Dharmika asks, how will be the daily activities in seclusion? What sort of meditations are practiced in seclusion? Thank you, Dharmika. Yeah. What happens when we have the opportunity to be alone, especially if we have the opportunity to be alone for extended periods of time? Personally, I find it very beautiful to have time alone and to see what happens, because the heart most surely has fortunate conditions then to be able to really open and to calm. And so the mindfulness becomes very easeful, and probably many of you know what I'm talking about from times that you may have had an opportunity to be on retreat. It's just so relaxing, isn't it? Just to be able to not speak, not relate, to be able to focus on the practice 100%. And of course, that's when we get to see how the mind is not really focused. That's how we get to see how the mind inclines to the past or the future or to proliferation around the present. We're often oblivious to this when we're in the crowds, in the midst of life, busy, engaged. So to be able to experience some solitude, kaya viveka, physical seclusion, the mind will very naturally start to reveal itself. And we can see how we may be far from the madding crowd in our physical circumstances, but we bring the crowd with us for sure. And we need to be able to, in a way, work through all of this mental activity, the madding crowd within. That's what happens on solitary retreat, first of all. And it can sometimes be a big shock for people when they go on retreat to discover what a wild mind they have, but very good to start to appreciate all the busyness, all the noise, all the chatter, all the emotions buffeting around, and to just breathe through and just allow the mind to open up and reveal all these tendencies, these patterns. And slowly but surely, things calm down. So, Dharmika, I would say the daily activities in seclusion, it's more like this experience unfolding. Very good to sit quietly, focus on the breath, focus on the body, and just allow this cooling down to happen. Very good to walk. If we're very restless, the mind is active, and it's difficult to be still, we can take our seclusion onto the walking path, just like the monk senior, walk alone. And so moving the body, aware of the body moving, allowing the mind again to disentangle, to settle. So it can be quite shocking how busy and active and loud, clamorous the crowded mind can be when we experience seclusion from time to time. But over time, when we allow ourselves to have retreat time, to have physical seclusion, it's very natural that this will settle slowly. The mind will come to more peaceful spaces. And nature, to be out in nature can be extremely valuable because nature is peaceful. Even when, there's very loud, like in Thailand, there's always lots of noise. In nature, the frogs are croaking at top volume, or the cicadas, mosquitoes whining next to your ears, or the birds singing, profusion of bird song in Thailand. But nevertheless, being in nature, there's a soothing quality, isn't there? Because it's not really the same as being in a city, as being in the midst of traffic, as being in the midst of human communication, verbal chatter. The sounds of nature are not as triggering for us by any stretch. In fact, they're soothing, often soothing, to tune in to the sounds of nature, the wind in the trees, the sounds of the birds, delicate, subtle. So many sounds in nature are soft, and even when they're raucous, there's a quality, there's a dharma, there's a natural unfolding that's happening. And it's helpful for us to tune in to that. So to be in nature, to watch nature, to hear nature, the sounds of nature around us, also helping us to unravel and disengage and come to a place of peace. So I guess what I'm really pointing to here, Dhammika, is that there's no specific activities required. The activity of being alone and making time for meditation, being mindful, does the work. It's really good also to be on retreat and to have schedules so that we can practice together in larger numbers. Even in that crowd, we can experience solitude because we've all agreed that we're going to practice silence, disengagement, not looking at each other, not interfering with each other, giving each other space. And then we will have a schedule on a retreat often because it's so much easier for people to know how to work, to live, to move together in a way that enables each one to be secluded. And this is a wonderful thing. So to go on retreat and to have a schedule of, say, sitting time, walking time, time with no particular activity, to just relax, to maybe look at the sky, to maybe drink a cup of tea, whatever it is, mindfully, also extremely valuable. Retreat times are very precious, and it's good for us to try to make time for retreat. So thank you very much for your questions, Amika. And Coming back to, Charles Lee's got a question. Hi, Charles Lee. How can I, as a layperson, detect when I'm skillfully seeking solitude versus unskillfully seeking solitude as an escape from unpleasant experience and the difficulties of lay life? Very good question. Thank you very much for this, Charles Lee. Yeah, we need to be very conscious of this. I would say that, if we're practicing mindfulness, we're waking up to this mind and body, we can notice, what is the intention here? How does it feel? If I'm trying to get away from people so I can have some peace and quiet, there may be a tinge of aversion in that, and one feels it, right? It can feel uncomfortable. It's like I'm rejecting, pushing away, disliking the situation that I'm in, yearning perhaps, or longing, so the desire can come in and be noticed. I'm longing to get away from these people, to get away from this situation. I'm yearning for some peace and quiet. So nothing wrong with any of this, but we can notice where there's a tinge of suffering through desire or aversion, and just being conscious of that. Oftentimes, if we have that inclination through desire or aversion to get away, to be alone, to be at peace, it's not a bad thing, but it's like we can skillfully just put that aside and work with those feelings of wanting and not wanting, because that's the priority always, to see, to root out, to see and then to root out any suffering in the heart. So when we're longing or hating, and that's our inclination to seclusion comes from such a place, it doesn't matter whether we get that seclusion or not. What really matters is to wake up to the suffering now and give that full attention. When we're inclining towards seclusion through an intention to practice for the benefit of all beings, to practice virtue, to practice restraint, it's like a renunciation for us quite often. To seek solitude isn't easy. It's not necessarily that we want to be alone. We want to stop watching movies or being with our friends. We are renouncing the world in order to practice. We can feel what that feels like also. A slight struggle, perhaps, sometimes, but an inclination to the good, an inclination to wish to practice well. And that's something to nourish. That's more like a spiritual yearning. There's still a tinge of desire in that, but it's something quite wholesome, chanda, this wholesome desire to develop on the path. And we can nourish that. And sometimes it just happens, doesn't it, Charles Lee, that the conditions enable a quiet afternoon or a few moments when we're alone, or an opening for us to go on retreat. And when the conditions allow that, and we can work for that also, friends, we can create the conditions that allow for these quiet moments. When these quiet moments come along, these opportunities for solitude, then we can just fully open to them and make the most of. So I hope that meets your question, Charles Lee. Thank you. Okay, I'll just see if there are any other questions. Thank you so much, Petrus, for your quotes from the Bible. It's always beautiful to take in teachings from the Christian tradition. They're very beautiful. People can see those. Very good. Thank you so much. Any other questions? We have 10 minutes to go. So if anything else comes up for any of you, speaking about the Bible, the practice of Jesus immediately comes to mind, and we can reflect on how Christ Jesus, took himself away from the crowds and went into the desert for 40 days and nights and grappled with his own mind. And, so this Kaya Viveka, he took himself away to be secluded, knowing that this was going to be something helpful for him. And then he worked with the development of Chitta Viveka, you could say. We can say he was grappling with his own mind, or if that doesn't ring true for you, we can say he met the devil. The devil came to him and challenged him in many ways. The devil offered him both ways out of suffering and also ways of manifesting in the world as a person of great power, great might. It's very interesting that Jesus and the Buddha both had the possibility, the potential to be great beings in the world, great leaders, powerful figures, but they both chose to renounce worldly aims and values and to develop spiritual values. And so Jesus came through the 40 days in the desert, fasting, practicing alone, and he purified his heart, no doubt to a great extent through this incredible practice. And just like the Buddha and Jesus were both, most of the time, surrounded by people. The Buddha was surrounded by people. He was praised by others for being somebody who promoted solitude, encouraged solitude, both solitude of the body and solitude of the mind, the heart, and then the ultimate solitude from the taints, from the causes of suffering. But he said when he was praised for this, he said, well, actually, I have many disciples who practice solitude much more than I do. Because I, the Buddha, I'm surrounded by people much of the time. The Buddha was, of course, tirelessly teaching people, and as was Jesus Christ, surrounded by people, teaching tirelessly, trying to help others to wake up. So, the Buddha didn't actually practice Kaya Viveka very much, physical solitude. He had a few periods of time in his life when he was on retreat, but very few. And most of the time we gather. He was walking through the countryside from town to town, village to village, and crowds of people would come to meet him, to hear him speak, to learn from him. So here is our example, of somebody who practiced solitude for sure, but it wasn't physical solitude. It was solitude of the heart. It was a quiet, peaceful, unruffled, unshakable heart. So we can take heart from this, friends, because I know that for many of us, we have plenty going on in our lives, plenty of busyness, plenty of people, plenty of talking and relating. And none of that is an obstacle for us if we can find time to make the most of any solitude, physical solitude that's possible, but above all, make time to bring mindfulness to the fore. Have the energy for that, give that the priority, and develop the solitude of the heart, Chitta Viveka, the cool heart, the knowing heart, the wise witness to life that's always teaching us the Dharma. Always then we're seeing the Dharma unfolding, we're learning, we're letting go of suffering. This is the true solitude that we want to cultivate, right? So thank you. Okay, we've got one more question and then we'll have to conclude, I think. Thank you so much, Norma, for your question. Can we manifest Chitta Viveka while caregiving by reciting Buddha underneath busy duties? That's a beautiful question, and I appreciate you bringing this in. because many of us, including myself actually, are caregivers, so looking after others. And of course, this requires a tremendous amount of time with others, and not only time with them, but a loving, compassionate, friendly, kind, sometimes even we need to converse a lot with others in order to enable them to feel comfortable and at ease. And so this is a practice very much in relationship with others. But yeah, we can still be practicing every moment for sure. And we can still have a cool, secluded witnessing of all that's unfolding around us. I think it's a great suggestion, Norma, to have a mantra can be very helpful. Um, I personally don't find that incline towards a mantra when I'm with others. It's more like really turning the attention to the moment and what's the best possible behavior, speech, and thought that can be present in this moment. What can I make effort towards? What can I let go of that's unskillful in this moment? What can I enable that is skillful in this moment? How can I chart my course through all these daily activities in a way that's nourishing for me, nourishing for others, entirely virtuous, and promoting mindfulness, promoting awareness? I think a mantra, though, can be very helpful for this. So to stay grounded, to stay present, to recite Buddha, wonderful. To be paying attention to the body, wonderful. To be watching the breath, wonderful. To be standing like a gatekeeper at the gate, watching. Is there any aversion arising in this moment? Is there any desire coming in at this point? To be very watchful of any kind of suffering that manifests. This is a very waking practice. It keeps us very awake and alert if we're looking for defilements. So this is another way that we can practice when we're around others, caring for others, or in any other way working with other people. So I really appreciate you bringing that in. I actually find myself that what's interesting is that when I do have times of solitude, and I'm not actually required to be doing anything for anyone, that's the time when I find a mantra can be helpful, because sometimes the mind is quite active and busy after having been with others. Just as I was saying, when we go on retreat, when we find some seclusion, we can often sort of discover how our minds are just full, crowded. We don't need to be surrounded by people. We're surrounded by all the people in here, all the happenings, all the complexity here. And so for me personally, I find when I sit meditate, that's when I really notice, whoa, there's a crowd in here at the moment. And that's a time also when I find that a mantra or using the mala beads, I've got some mala beads I use, and just a touching with each breath, the mala beads, so helpful to begin to come back to ground, come back to the present moment, calm down, cool down, and become truly secluded again. So yeah, just some sharing there with great gratitude to you, Norma, for bringing up this wonderful point. Okay, thanks everyone. Big appreciation for your kind comments and all that you've shared in the chat. Good wishes to everyone. Let's end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, 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 anumodami.